Hey, beautiful friends. It's Catherine here from Sacred Heart Alchemy and Divinely Inspired Feminine Leaders. It finally cooled off enough to come outside. It was really kind of brutal here today. So I'm just kind of getting around to doing this share with you. A little while ago, I pulled a card from the Mary Magdalene deck that you've probably seen or heard me talking about over the last month or so. I've had the deck for just about 40 days, and the deck has 44 cards in it. So you would think, you know, if things worked out in a certain way, that you'd get a different card almost every day. And if you know me, and you know my understanding of the law of attraction, and when things start getting my attention, when something comes up 3 times, I pay attention, right? It's either a message for me or a message for me to share with others. And it certainly can be both, and it very often is. And so 3 times since I've been using this deck, I've pulled up this card called the 7th Power. Anger is information. And this deck uses the idea of powers in kind of a little bit of a backwards way. Megan Watterson, who created this beautiful deck, based this on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And the 7 powers are actually the same as what in Christian history might be called the 7 demons. And in some traditions, it's believed that Jesus expelled these demons from Mary Magdalene. So, and when we're trapped in our ego, we are more likely to be in the throes of these 7 powers until we can begin to allow for the death of the ego and more of the soul to come through. And then we begin to kind of override, right, the ego's programming and beliefs and step more into our soul. So because this card came up 3 times for me in a relatively short period of time, plus given the size of the deck, I decided that I would jump on and just talk about women and anger, and basically pulling from a couple of different places. I'm going to read the message from Mary Magdalene, but I'm also pulling from Louise Hay's book, Heal Your Body, and her epilogue that was written in 2007, so 15 years ago now. And maybe I'll start with that. So she added this epilogue in 2007. The last major revision of this book was in 1988, so it has been around for a long time. And if you're familiar with this book, you know that Louise created it by listing every dis-ease or illness in the body, and then indicating kind of what the underlying mental or emotional condition is, and then created an affirmation or a new thought statement around it. And she literally did this originally on a mimeograph machine in her Science of Mind church, and it really took off. And she had come to these understandings as she worked with men with AIDS out in San Francisco, when AIDS was really just beginning, to come on the scene as a significant medical issue for gay men. And she held support groups for these men. And from the information that she gleaned from their sessions, she began to see the connections between different illnesses or dis-eases, where they showed up in the body, and what emotions or underlying belief systems were most strongly connected. If you've never looked at this, she actually has a workbook connected to this. And if you've never looked at it, it is sort of mind-blowing. I see Tori on here, and she knows this. Whenever a client, this is like my little Bible, and when a client starts sharing with me about some kind of, medical situation or illness or dis-ease that they've been diagnosed with or they're struggling with, I will always say, let's see what Louise has to say about that. And I have to tell you that it's always right on. People are like, you made that up, right? Like, she didn't write that 40 years ago. And I'm like, yes, she wrote it probably more than 40 years ago, because that was the most recent edition. So it is really mind-blowing when you look at the information that came through. I'm sure, you know, much of it was downloaded for her. She was a spiritual person. In case you don't know, she later in life went on to create Hay House, which is the publishing company for many, many spiritual. I've already got it in my Amazon card. You're a trip, Dory. So in this book, in the epilogue, what Louise has to say, I'll just read you rather than me try to just share. She said, I still get emails asking for mental patterns for the latest diseases of the moment, such as fibromyalgia. However, I see no reason to add any more patterns. Well, my phone is going sideways. I've learned that there are really just two mental patterns that contribute to dis-ease: fear and anger. Anger can show up as impatience, irritation, frustration, criticism, resentment, jealousy, or bitterness. These are all thoughts that poison the body. And I will say they poison the body because every emotion has its own chemistry that runs through the body. So these denser, heavier, you know, more negative emotions, energy in motion, are made up of chemistry that has more of the cortisol and the adrenaline and, you know, some other, you know, I'm not a scientific person, but more of the chemistry that puts us in that fight or flight response, or sometimes a freeze response. And it's coarse, and they wear down the organs and all the way down to the cellular level in the body. So, you know, it's not only mentally and emotionally difficult to carry these emotions, but it's actually very physically damaging to the body to hold on to the energy of these emotions. So, and then she goes on to talk about fear, which I won't get into. And she said, if you find yourself with some sort of disease that's not listed in this book, become your own investigator and healer. Ask yourself, is it one of the forms of fear, or is it one of the forms of anger? Am I willing to replace those thoughts? Am I willing to replace those thoughts with positive affirmations? And then she talks about the importance of loving your body, which I absolutely agree. And I highly recommend to people that they get in a practice of being in gratitude to their body. Hey, Jen. You know, thanking their body, even maybe the parts that they are not totally in love with just yet. But I want to talk about what I see as the major problem with women and anger, which is that basically women have been socialized, conditioned not to express their anger, right? And we know, I certainly know, and I've, you know, shared this before, that it's a universal, right? It's a collective issue for the most part for women. It's different for men. Somehow it's okay. It's one of the only emotions that men are sort of, it's approved of for men to express. And then it's an emotion that is really suppressed and repressed for women. So it just shows how out of balance, right, our whole mental and emotional regulation and the messages around that are. Because this doesn't do men any good either. They don't have any other tools in their toolbox very often. You know, men of a certain generation, I do think that's beginning to shift and change. But you know, women, years ago, I heard this phrase, you know, good girl, good daughter, good wife, good mother, good wife, good grief, right? So basically, this is what we are supposed to be doing, right? Just being the good girl, not expressing. Good girls don't express anger. They don't get mad about things. And this messaging comes, you know, in so many different ways, generally in a collective sense through the patriarchy that we've all lived with for thousands of years, but more specifically, you know, even through our family systems. Different cultures certainly have more or less indoctrination around this, or certain religions, our education system, and certainly media, right? Everywhere you turn, it's, you know, the good girl, the girl who, you know, doesn't get angry, who doesn't yell, who doesn't express what her body is telling her is the truth, because anger is actually an indication that something in your field, something that's happening in your environment, is out of alignment with your highest good, right? We're out of sync, and anger is our body's way of alerting us to that. The problem comes when we try to express it and we're shut down. We may just be told, be quiet, or, you know, be a good girl, or you're just making that up, or you don't really feel that way. You don't really feel that way? Are you kidding me? Like, who are they to tell us how we feel, right? But this is basically how it's gone. And so, and certainly the worst case scenario is that you can be severely abused mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, punished with food deprivation, or, you know, all kinds of things for expressing anger, if that is not a value that's held in your family, if the value is do not express anger. And, you know, the two things that I, you know, mostly want to focus on, one I've already mentioned, is that when we don't allow that energy to complete its cycle and be expressed, but instead are forced to press it down, we are literally packing down all those harmful chemicals, all of that chemistry that just stays stuck in our body. And this is what leads to the dis-ease, right? This is what eventually leads to illness, especially when that anger is turned inward, when we tell ourselves that we're stupid, when we tell ourselves we shouldn't feel that way, when we tell ourselves that we're bad, right? Why can't we just go by the rules? I mean, we begin to take on the languaging, the messaging, the belief system of all of the people, institutions, you know, hierarchies around us that are giving us those messages. So on the one hand, it creates an environment within our mental, emotional, physical body for imbalance to happen. It might show up as a mental, you know, condition, as an emotional condition, or certainly as a physical condition. The other, and perhaps even more insidious, not that I should want to compare one to the other, but the other insidious thing that happens is that we turn down the dial on it so much that we literally lose touch with that intuition, with those messages from our own bodies, from our own higher knowing, our own inner truth, that something is wrong. And when that happens, when our dial gets turned down, then we are more likely to both find ourselves in situations that are unsafe without even really recognizing it, and then actually, because our vibration has been suppressed and lowered, and we may be holding in, you know, some of the other emotions that are connected to anger, as Louise mentioned here. I'm going to just pull them up again. Impatience, irritation, frustration, criticism, resentment, jealousy, bitterness. We often see these played out with women against each other, especially the criticism, the jealousy, the resentment, right? Or the bitterness. She's getting more than I am, or she got that promotion, or she got that guy, or she got a better body, or, you know, whatever it is. Women have been set up to go into comparison and into betrayal of each other and mistrust of each other. So we learn to mistrust ourselves and our own body's mechanism for letting us know that something is out of alignment. And then we also are taught to mistrust other girls and other women who may have something that we don't have, or, you know, look a certain way that is more socially highlighted than how we may look. So There is a place, there is a need for us to be able to express our anger. You know, we're told, and sometimes I think even the spiritual community can be, could be more careful about this, because sometimes a spiritual message can come across that it isn't okay to be angry. I shouldn't be feeling that way. And I just want to say right up front, I think that's a gross misinterpretation and misuse of spiritual language or understanding. It certainly is true in many religions with their dogma, but in terms of spirituality in and of itself, there would be no judgment that anger is bad or wrong, because it's understood to be part of our nervous system, this beautiful system of, all right, Jen, go get some rest, girl. This system of our own intuition and our own inner knowing, and, you know, turning down the dial on that. So I'm going to read, it's going to take a couple of minutes, but I'm going to read what Megan Watterson had to say about this in Mary Magdalene's, in this interpretation of Mary Magdalene's gospel. And she says the seventh power is rage. Anger is information. It's always felt significant to me that rage is the seventh power. Rage can be the most derailing force in our lives. But first, it's crucial to distinguish between the rage that brings destruction and the rage that brings clarity. The oppressive need to appear good, to not express what we truly feel, forces many of us to stay stuck in the process of healing from our trauma. There's a false narrative that to be spiritual, you have to be in some perpetual state of bliss or peace and never fall to the ground in a fit of human rage. I love this part. Being angry is human, and being human is holy. Anger is information. Anger informs us, connects us to our humanity, and reminds us of what we care for most about in our lives. When we've been traumatized, there's a sacred rage that needs to be expressed in order for us to reclaim our voice. That form of rage is clarifying. It helps us begin to set boundaries as an act of love for ourselves. The difference between the rage that clarifies and the rage that destroys is that one is simply experienced directly as information. The other is acted on. Anger informs me, but love is what I let guide me when I'm ready to take action. At the end of Mary's gospel, after Mary has shared the teaching she learned from Christ from directly within her heart, Peter doesn't believe her. He doesn't believe Mary because she is a woman and was considered less worthy in rights and power in the first century Roman Empire. I might add, in the 21st century United States, this is still the case. Just listen to Texas and North Carolina and Florida and Louisiana and Tennessee and, where else? You name a few. Peter's rage clouds his ability to hear the truth in what Mary has to teach them. Levi, one of the other disciples, confronts Peter and says, "You are always ready to give way to your perpetual inclination to anger. And even now you're doing that, exactly that, by questioning this woman as though you're her adversary." And that comes directly from Mary's gospel. Peter is unable to see that it's his rage that keeps him from wanting to believe Mary. The seventh power at work within him will silence and erase Mary's voice for almost 2 millennia. If you're familiar with the Bible and how it was interpreted through what became more organized religion, they said the church was built on Peter, right? Peter was the rock on which the church was built. And that's how I understand that last sentence. The seventh power at work within Peter will silence and erase Mary's voice for almost 2 millennia. For 2,000 years, Mary Magdalene's voice was silenced. And when she was finally recognized, she was recognized as a prostitute or a whore whom Jesus saved. And it's only been, maybe in the last 50 years or so that the church rolled that back and actually said that Mary was a saint and a disciple and a teacher in her own right. But a lot of damage had been done in the meantime. So as one of the 7 powers of the ego, even rage is not everlasting. Only love is. And that was Mary's gospel, right? Love is what I let guide me when I'm ready to take action. So feel the anger, feel the rage, the sacred rage. Let it come through you. One of the reasons I believe that women, besides having the dial turned down, there's also a terrible fear in tapping into their own anger and rage, because sometimes it feels like a well or a river that you'll never reach the bottom of, right? Like it will just, almost like tears sometimes, like once I tap into that, it's just never gonna stop. And that's scary. The other piece is I don't want to become like the people who abused me, who caused this sense of anger and rage within me. And therefore, I can't let myself feel it, because if I do, I might become like them. So we keep it suppressed. So, there's a kind of a fine line, because your anger or your rage can become overwhelming if you don't have the skills or a skillful person to help you manage it. As Irene Lyons, who's a specialist in nervous system regulation, talks about titrating, right? If we're going to work and allow this rage to come through, it has to be in a very safe container where there can be support and holding for a woman as she begins to tap into that, so that she's not re-traumatized in the process and doesn't fall back into perhaps hurting herself or someone else. So at the end of each of these cards and readings, there's always something called soul voice meditation. So I will leave you with this soul voice meditation. If you know that you have some anger, and we all do, and we all should, because certainly there are plenty of things that have happened to us or to people we love in our lives, to ask this question: what information is my anger revealing to me in this moment? So you might want to sit with that and do some journaling or some tapping, or just feeling into your body and noticing where anger might be held in your body. What information is my anger revealing to me in this moment? So I'm going to leave you with that thought. If you know that anger is something that you struggle with, if expressing your anger, allowing yourself to get in touch with your anger, fear around all of that, terror around all of that, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to give you some resources, or if it seems appropriate, even for us to do some work together around being able to express your anger and your rage, so that you can come back into alignment, so that you can begin to restore not only your physical health, but your mental and your emotional health. Please feel free to reach out through my website, www.sacredheartalchemy.com. You can either schedule a 20-minute consult, a free consult, or just fill out the contact form and indicate that you'd like to have a conversation, and or you can just drop me a message here. That's easy too. Okay, that's it for tonight. Have a beautiful rest of your holiday weekend, and I will see you again soon. Namaste.